The blood on Cassidy Vale's hands would not wash clean, no matter how hard she scrubbed them in the creek. And she knew it was not because the stains were real, but because guilt had a way of seeping into your skin like creek water into leather. She had stolen the loaf of bread from the mercantile in Durango, Colorado, and the shame of it burned hotter than the August sun beating down on her shoulders. It was 1878, and the mining town was booming with silver strikes and promises of fortune. But none of that wealth had trickled down to a 19-year-old girl who could not read the help-wanted signs posted in shop windows, who could not write her name on a contract, even if someone had been willing to hire her. She dried her hands on her threadbare skirt and looked up at the Rocky Mountains rising in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow even in summer. Somewhere up there, people said, were men who had turned their backs on civilization, trappers and hunters who lived like ghosts among the pines. Cassidy had always thought those stories were just tales to scare children. But lately, she had been thinking that disappearing into those mountains might be the only option left for someone like her. Her stomach growled despite the bread she had eaten, and she stood up from the creek bank, knowing she needed to find work or shelter before nightfall. The problem was that Durango was not a town that welcomed drifters, especially female ones with no family and no prospects. She had arrived 3 weeks ago on a wagon train from Kansas, running from a stepfather who had made it clear that her only value was in what he could sell her for. The wagon master had taken pity on her, but once they reached Durango, she was on her own. The sun was beginning its descent behind the mountains when Cassidy made her way back toward town, keeping to the shadows of the buildings. She had been sleeping in an abandoned lean-to behind the livery stable, and she hoped no one had discovered her makeshift home while she was gone. As she rounded the corner near the blacksmith shop, she nearly collided with a man who was so large he blocked out the sun. Cassidy stumbled backward, her heart hammering. The man was easily over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that looked like they could carry a full-grown elk without strain. His hair was dark brown and fell past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord, and his face was covered with a thick beard that could not hide the sharp intelligence in his gray eyes. He wore buckskin clothing that marked him as someone who spent more time in the wilderness than in town, and a rifle was slung across his back with the casual ease of someone who knew how to use it. "Sorry," Cassidy muttered, trying to step around him. The man did not move. His eyes were fixed on her face with an intensity that made her want to run. "You are the girl who has been sleeping behind the livery," he said. His voice was deep and rough, like gravel rolling in a creek bed. Cassidy's throat went dry. "I do not know what you are talking about. The stable boy mentioned it to me when I was getting supplies for my horse. Said there was a girl who looked half-starved hiding out there." He paused, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes. He was right about the half-starved part. "I am fine," Cassidy said, lifting her chin even as her stomach betrayed her with another growl. A ghost of something that might have been amusement crossed the man's face. "You have a name, Cassidy Vale." "Owen Lawson," he said. "People up in the mountains call me the Trapper, though I do more hunting than trapping these days." He shifted the pack on his shoulders. "When is the last time you had a real meal, Cassidy Vale?" She wanted to lie, to tell him she was doing just fine, but the kindness in his question undermined all her defenses. "I cannot remember," she admitted quietly. Owen nodded as if he had expected that answer. "There is a decent restaurant down the street. Come on." "I do not have any money." "I did not ask if you did." He started walking, and after a moment of hesitation, Cassidy followed. The restaurant was a simple establishment with wooden tables and benches, but to Cassidy it might as well have been a palace. The smell of roasted meat and fresh bread made her dizzy with hunger. Owen ordered for both of them, pointing at items on the menu board that Cassidy could not read, and soon they had plates piled high with beef, potatoes, and beans. Cassidy tried to eat slowly to maintain some dignity, but she was too hungry. Owen watched her without comment, occasionally eating from his own plate. When she finally slowed down, he pushed his plate toward her. "Finish it. I ate before I came to town." "Why are you being kind to me?" Cassidy asked, even as she reached for a piece of bread from his plate. "Because you look like you need it," Owen said simply. "And because I know what it is like to have nowhere to go." They sat in silence for a while, and Cassidy studied him when she thought he was not looking. His hands were scarred and calloused, the hands of someone who worked hard for everything he had. There was a quiet strength about him that made her feel safe in a way she had not felt in years. "What brought you to Durango?" Owen asked finally. Cassidy considered lying, but something about this man made her want to tell the truth. "I was running from my stepfather. He wanted to sell me to a saloon owner in Kansas City. I left before he could." Owen's jaw tightened. "You did the right thing." "I am not sure about that. At least in a saloon I would have food and shelter." She immediately regretted the words. "I did not mean that. I just do not know what to do anymore. I cannot find work because I cannot read the signs. I cannot write my name on anything. I am useless." "You are not useless," Owen said firmly. "You survived your stepfather. You made it all the way to Colorado on your own. That takes strength most people do not have." "But I cannot read," Cassidy said, and she hated how small her voice sounded. "My mother died when I was 6, and my stepfather never saw the point in sending me to school. He said girls did not need education." Owen was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the table. Then he said, "I could teach you." Cassidy stared at him. "What?" "I could teach you to read. I have a cabin up in the mountains, about half a day's ride from here. I come down to Durango every few weeks for supplies, but mostly I live up there alone. I could use someone to help with the cooking and mending, and in exchange, I would teach you your letters." "You do not even know me," Cassidy said, suspicion creeping into her voice. "Why would you make that offer?" "Because everyone deserves a chance to learn," Owen said. "And because living alone gets old after a while. I am not asking for anything improper if that is what you are worried about. You would have your own space in the cabin. I would be a teacher, nothing more." Cassidy wanted to believe him, but she had learned to be wary of men offering help. "And if I say no?" "Then I will wish you well and be on my way," Owen said. "But winter comes early in the mountains, and Durango is not a forgiving town for people with no money. You should think about it." She did think about it, all through the rest of the meal and during the walk back to the livery stable. Owen did not press her for an answer, just told her he would be leaving at dawn the next day, and she could find him at the stable if she decided to come. Then he tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Cassidy alone with the most important decision of her life. That night, she lay in her lean-to and stared up at the stars visible through the gaps in the wood. She could stay in Durango and hope for a miracle, or she could trust a stranger and go into the mountains. Both options were risks, but at least with Owen there was the promise of learning, of becoming someone more than the illiterate girl her stepfather had tried to break. When dawn broke pink and gold over the mountains, Cassidy was waiting at the livery stable with her few belongings tied in a bundle. Owen looked up from saddling his horse, and something like relief crossed his face. "You came," he said. "I came," Cassidy confirmed. "But if you try anything improper, I will find a way to make you regret it." Owen's laugh was a deep rumble. "Fair enough. Come on, let me introduce you to Goliath." He patted the massive black horse beside him. "He is gentle despite his size, and he will not mind carrying both of us until we can get you your own mount." The ride up into the mountains took longer than half a day because they had to travel slowly on the narrow trails. Cassidy clung to Owen's waist, acutely aware of the solid muscle beneath his buckskin shirt, of the way he handled the horse with practiced ease. They climbed higher and higher until the air grew thin and cool, and the pines grew so thick they blocked out the sun. Owen's cabin appeared suddenly in a clearing, a solid structure built from logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. It was larger than Cassidy had expected, with glass windows that must have cost a fortune to transport up the mountain. Behind the cabin was a small barn for the horse and a creek that bubbled over smooth stones. "Home," Owen said simply as he dismounted and helped Cassidy down. Inside, the cabin was divided into two main rooms. The larger room held a stone fireplace, a table with two chairs, shelves lined with supplies, and a narrow bed built into one wall. The smaller room, which Owen showed her to, had a cot, a chest for storage, and a window that looked out over the valley below. "It is not much, but it is warm and dry," Owen said. "Make yourself comfortable. I will get us some supper started." Over the next few days, Cassidy learned the rhythm of Owen's life. He rose before dawn to check his traps and hunt, returning by mid-morning with game or fish. She learned to prepare the meat, to stretch hides, to tend the small garden he had planted near the cabin. Owen was patient with her mistakes, showing her how to do things properly without making her feel stupid. And every night, after supper was cleared away, he brought out a slate and chalk. "We will start with the alphabet," Owen said on the first night, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he wrote the letters. "These are the building blocks of everything you will raid." Cassidy stared at the strange symbols. "They look like scratches." "They do at first," Owen agreed. "But once you learn them, they will start to look like words. Start with A. It is one of the easiest." They sat by the firelight, Owen patiently going through each letter, making Cassidy repeat them until she could recognize them by sight. His voice was soothing in the quiet of the cabin, and Cassidy found herself relaxing in a way she never had before. When she struggled with a letter, Owen would place his hand over hers, guiding the chalk to form the proper shape. The touch was innocent, but it sent a strange flutter through her chest each time. "You are a good teacher," Cassidy said one night after they had been working on vowels for hours. Owen looked up from the slate, surprise evident in his expression. "I have never taught anyone before." "Well, you are good at it. Patient." She hesitated, then asked, "How did you learn to read?" "My mother taught me before she died. She was a school teacher back east before she married my father and they moved out here. She said that reading was the key to freedom, that it would let me go places I could never physically travel." His voice grew soft. "She was right. Books have taken me all over the world, even when I am stuck in this cabin during the winter." "Do you ever get lonely up here?" Cassidy asked. Owen was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then he said, "Yes, but loneliness is better than being around people who make you feel worse about yourself. I learned that lesson young." Cassidy understood that sentiment completely. "Is that why you left civilization?" "Part of it. My father died when I was 16 and I had no other family. I worked as a ranch hand for a few years, then as a scout for the army, but I never fit in anywhere. The mountains called to me, and one day I just answered that call. I have been up here for 7 years now. Do you regret it?" "Not for a moment," Owen said. Then he looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Until recently, I thought I had everything I needed, but having someone to talk to teach, it reminds me of what I have been missing." The days turned into weeks, and Cassidy's education progressed steadily. She could recognize all the letters now, and Owen was teaching her to sound out simple words. Each small victory felt enormous, and Owen celebrated them with her, his rare smiles lighting up his rugged face in a way that made Cassidy's heart do strange things. She was falling for him. She realized one morning as she watched him chop wood outside the cabin. The way his muscles flexed with each swing of the axe, the concentration on his face, the gentleness he showed her every evening by the fire. He was everything her stepfather had not been. Strong but kind, capable but patient, masculine but never threatening. The problem was that Owen had made it clear their arrangement was purely practical. He was teaching her to read, and she was helping him with the cabin work. There was nothing romantic about it, no matter how much Cassidy might wish otherwise. But then came the night when everything changed. They were sitting by the fire as usual, working on a particularly difficult set of words. Cassidy was frustrated because she kept mixing up the letters B and D, and no matter how many times Owen explained the difference, she could not seem to get it right. "I am stupid," she said finally, throwing down the chalk. "I will never learn this." "You are not stupid," Owen said firmly. "You are learning something that most people learn as children, and you are doing it as an adult. That makes it harder, not impossible." "But what if I cannot do it?" Cassidy felt tears pricking at her eyes and hated herself for it. "What if I am too damaged from all those years of not learning?" Owen set down the slate and moved closer to her on the bench. "Look at me, Cassidy." When she raised her eyes to his, he continued, "You are one of the strongest people I have ever met. You survived things that would have broken most people. You are not damaged. You are resilient. And you will learn to read because you are too stubborn to give up." "How can you have so much faith in me?" Cassidy whispered. "Because I see you," Owen said. "Really see you. Not the girl who cannot read, but the woman who fights every day to become more than what others told her she could be." The space between them seemed to shrink. Cassidy could smell the pine smoke in Owen's hair, could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Owen," she breathed. He pulled back suddenly, standing up from the bench. "It is late. We should get some rest." Cassidy felt the rejection like a physical blow. "Of course," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Good night." She retreated to her small room and lay on the cot, staring at the ceiling. She had been so sure he felt something too, but maybe she had been wrong. Maybe she was just a charity case to him, someone to ease his loneliness but nothing more. The next morning, Owen was distant. He went out early and did not return until late afternoon, and when they sat down for their reading lesson that evening, he positioned himself farther away from her than usual. Cassidy wanted to ask what was wrong, but she was afraid of the answer. This pattern continued for several days. Owen taught her as diligently as ever, but the warmth between them had cooled. Cassidy threw herself into her studies, determined to prove she did not need his affection, only his teaching. She practiced her letters whenever she had a spare moment, writing them in the dirt outside the cabin, tracing them on the table while she waited for water to boil. One afternoon, while Owen was out checking his traps, Cassidy was gathering herbs near the edge of the clearing when she heard voices. She froze, then ducked behind a large pine tree. Through the branches, she could see 3 men on horseback making their way up the trail. They looked rough, with guns strapped to their hips and mean expressions on their faces. "You sure that trapper has gold up here?" one of them said. "That is what I heard in town. They say he trades pelts for gold coins, keeps them hidden in his cabin," another replied. "Well, let us go see if the rumors are true, and if he gives us any trouble we will put a bullet in him." Cassidy's blood ran cold. She had to warn Owen. She ran back to the cabin as quietly as she could, her mind racing. She had no idea when Owen would return, but she knew she needed to be ready. She grabbed the rifle Owen had shown her how to use for emergencies, checking to make sure it was loaded the way he had taught her. Then she heard the horses outside. The men had arrived. Cassidy's hands were shaking as she positioned herself near the window. The three men dismounted and approached the cabin cautiously. One of them kicked at the door. "Anyone home?" he called out. Cassidy stayed silent, her finger on the trigger. "Guess not," the man said. "Let us search the place." They started for the door, and Cassidy knew she had to act. She stepped out onto the porch, the rifle raised. "You need to leave," she said, proud that her voice only shook a little. "This is private property." The three men stopped and looked at her. Then the leader laughed. "Well, now, looks like the trapper has himself a woman. Where is he, girl? Gone hunting. And he will be back any minute with his rifle." "I do not think so," the man said, taking a step closer. "I think you are all alone up here. Now put down that gun before you hurt yourself." "I know how to use it," Cassidy said, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "I am sure you do," the man said mockingly. He took another step forward, and Cassidy fired a shot that kicked up dirt at his feet. The men all reached for their guns, and Cassidy knew she was in serious trouble. She had bought herself a few seconds at most. But then a shot rang out from the tree line, and the leader's hat flew off his head. "The next one goes through your skull," Owen's voice called out. He emerged from the trees, his rifle aimed steadily at the men. "Get on your horses and ride out of here, now." The men looked at each other, weighing their options. Owen shot again, this time so close to one man's boots that he jumped backward. "I said now." They mounted their horses quickly and galloped back down the trail. Owen watched until they were out of sight, then lowered his rifle and strode toward Cassidy. "Are you all right?" he asked, his hands gripping her shoulders as he searched her face for injuries. "I am fine," Cassidy said. "I heard them talking about gold. They were going to rob you. And you confronted 3 armed men with my rifle." Owen's voice was sharp with an emotion Cassidy could not quite identify. "You could have been killed." "What was I supposed to do? Let them ransack your cabin?" Cassidy shot back, adrenaline making her bold. "This is my home too now." Owen stared at her for a long moment. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Do not ever scare me like that again," he said roughly. "When I came back and saw those men here, saw you facing them down, I thought my heart would stop." Cassidy's face was pressed against his chest, and she could hear his heart racing. "I thought you did not care about me anymore. You have been so distant." Owen pulled back just enough to look down at her. "I have been distant because I care too much. Because every night when I sit next to you by the fire, all I want to do is pull you into my arms. Because you are 19 and beautiful, and you have your whole life ahead of you, and I am a 31-year-old hermit who lives in the mountains." "I do not care about any of that," Cassidy said. "I only care that you make me feel safe. That you have shown me more kindness in 2 months than anyone else has in my entire life. That when I look at you, I see the man I want to spend my life with." "Cassidy," Owen said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "You deserve better than this, better than me." "You do not get to decide what I deserve," Cassidy said. "I am choosing you, Owen Lawson. If you will have me." In answer, Owen cupped her face in his large, calloused hands and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, as if he was afraid she might break. But then Cassidy pressed closer, her hands fisting in his buckskin shirt, and the kiss deepened. It was like coming home, like every good thing Cassidy had ever dreamed of wrapped into one moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I am yours if you want me," he said, "for as long as you will have me." "Forever then," Cassidy said. That evening, they sat by the fire as usual, but this time Owen kept one arm around Cassidy's shoulders as he guided her through a particularly difficult passage. She was reading from one of his books now, slowly sounding out each word with determination. "The man walked through the forest," Cassidy read carefully. Then she looked up at Owen with a triumphant smile. "I read a whole sentence." "You did," Owen said, pride evident in his voice. "You are getting so good at this, Cassidy. Soon you will be reading entire books." "I could not have done it without you," Cassidy said. She set the book aside and turned to face him. "You saved me, Owen, in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Owen corrected. "I was existing before you came here, but I was not really living. You gave me a reason to wake up excited every morning, a reason to come back to the cabin at the end of the day." They talked late into the night, sharing stories of their pasts, making plans for their future. Owen told her about his mother's love of poetry, about the books she had read to him as a child. Cassidy told him about her mother's gentle hands, about the songs she used to sing before the sickness took her. They grieved together for the things they had lost, and celebrated the things they had found in each other. As autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Cassidy's reading skills improved dramatically. She could now read simple books on her own, and she was working on her writing. Owen carved her a proper pen, and she practiced forming letters on paper he had brought up from town. Her first goal was to write her own name in beautiful script. "Look," she said one evening, showing Owen the paper where she had written Cassidy Vale over and over. "I can write my name now." Owen examined her work carefully. "Your handwriting is better than mine," he said. "I am so proud of you, Cassidy," she beamed at him. "I want to write Cassidy Lawson next." Owen's eyes widened. "Are you asking me something?" Cassidy's courage wavered for a moment, but then she straightened her shoulders. "I am saying that I want to be your wife if you want to be my husband. I know it has only been a few months, but I have never been more sure of anything in my life." "We would have to go down to Durango to get married properly," Owen said slowly. "Find a preacher, make it legal." "Is that a yes?" Cassidy asked, her heart in her throat. Owen pulled her into his lap, kissing her soundly. "That is absolutely a yes. I would marry you tomorrow if we could get down the mountain that fast." They rode down to Durango 2 days later, both dressed in their best clothes. The town was bustling with miners and traders, but Cassidy barely noticed. She had eyes only for Owen, tall and strong beside her, his hand firmly holding hers. They found a preacher at the small church on the edge of town, and he agreed to marry them that very afternoon. The ceremony was simple, with only the preacher and his wife as witnesses. Cassidy wore a simple blue dress that Owen had bought for her, and Owen had trimmed his beard and tied back his hair with a new leather cord. When the preacher asked if she took this man to be her husband, Cassidy's "I do" rang out clear and strong. Owen's voice was rough with emotion when he said his vows. "I do." After the ceremony, Owen bought supplies for the winter, including several new books for Cassidy to practice with. They also stopped at the mercantile where Cassidy had stolen bread all those months ago. She had saved a few coins from some sewing work she had done for Owen, and she used them to pay for a loaf of bread. "Why did you do that?" Owen asked as they left the store. Cassidy explained about the theft, about the guilt that had haunted her. "I needed to make it right," she said. Owen kissed her temple. "You are a good woman, Cassidy Lawson." The ride back up the mountain felt different now that they were married. There was a new certainty between them, a sense of permanence that wrapped around Cassidy like a warm blanket. That night, in the cabin that was truly her home now, Owen carried her over the threshold and they began their life together as husband and wife. The winter came early and harsh that year. By November, Snow was piling up around the cabin, and the temperature dropped so low that ice formed on the inside of the windows. But inside, with the fire roaring and Owen's arms around her, Cassidy had never been warmer. They spent the long winter evenings reading together, Owen introducing her to Shakespeare and Dickens, to poetry and history. Cassidy absorbed it all like a woman dying of thirst, amazed by the worlds that opened up to her through the written word. "Listen to this," she said one evening, reading from a book of poetry. "I love thee with the breath, smiles, tears of all my life. That is beautiful, Owen." "It is," Owen agreed, "but it is even more beautiful because you are reading it to me." Cassidy set the book aside and moved to sit on Owen's lap, a position that had become familiar and comfortable between them. "I still cannot believe this is my life sometimes, that I am married to you, that I can read, that I am safe and warm and loved." "Believe it," Owen said, kissing her softly. "Because I am never letting you go." Spring arrived with a rush of melting snow and blooming wildflowers. Cassidy spent her days working in the expanded garden while Owen hunted and trapped. She was getting quite good at cooking now, creating meals from wild game and herbs that had Owen praising her skills. She had also taken to writing in a journal Owen had given her, documenting their life together in words she had fought so hard to learn. One morning in late May, Cassidy woke feeling ill. She made it outside before being sick, and Owen found her leaning against the porch railing, looking pale. "What is wrong?" he asked, immediately concerned. "Are you hurt?" "I do not know," Cassidy said. "I have been feeling strange for a few days now, tired all the time, and now this." Owen's eyes widened. "Cassidy, when was your last monthly time?" Cassidy thought back and felt her own eyes go wide. "I think it has been 2 months, maybe more." She looked at Owen with a mixture of fear and excitement. "Do you think?" "I think we might be having a baby," Owen said. His face split into the widest smile Cassidy had ever seen on him. He picked her up and spun her around carefully. "We are going to be parents." The pregnancy was not easy. Cassidy was sick for months, and Owen hovered over her constantly, making sure she was eating enough, resting enough. He took over most of the heavy work around the cabin, insisting that she focus on staying healthy. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, and Owen would read to her while she knitted tiny clothes for the baby. "What should we name the baby?" Cassidy asked one night when she was 6 months along. "I always liked the name Thomas for a boy," Owen said, "after my father. And maybe Margaret for a girl, after your mother." "Margaret Vale Lawson," Cassidy said, testing out the name. "I like it." But when the baby arrived in early February, during a fierce snowstorm that trapped them in the cabin for 3 days, it was not one baby but 2. Twin boys, both healthy and loud, with their father's gray eyes and their mother's dark hair. Owen was beside himself with joy and terror in equal measure. "2," he kept saying as he held his sons. "We have 2 babies, Cassidy." "We do," Cassidy said, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. "What should we name them?" They named the firstborn Thomas Owen Lawson and the second Marcus James Lawson, after Owen's father and Cassidy's own father, who she had barely known. The boys were a handful from the start, demanding and hungry and seemingly never sleeping at the same time. But Cassidy and Owen worked together as a team, taking turns walking the floor with crying babies, changing diapers, marveling at tiny fingers and toes. "I never thought I could love anyone as much as I love you," Owen said one night as he watched Cassidy nurse the twins. "But these boys, they have stolen pieces of my heart I did not even know existed." "I know exactly what you mean," Cassidy said. She looked around the cabin at the life they had built together and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. A year and a half ago, she had been starving and illiterate, sleeping in a lean-to behind a stable. Now she was a wife and mother, she could read and write, and she was loved beyond measure. As the boys grew, so did Cassidy's education. She read everything Owen had in the cabin, and he brought her new books whenever he went to town. She wrote letters to the one kind woman she had met on the wagon train, describing her life in the mountains. She taught herself basic arithmetic, so she could help Owen with the accounts of his trapping business. When the twins were 2 years old, Cassidy announced she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in the fall of 1882, she gave birth to a daughter. They named her Margaret, as they had planned, and she was the perfect image of Cassidy with the same brown eyes and dimpled smile. Owen was impossibly gentle with his daughter, this tiny girl who had his heart from her first breath. He would sit with her for hours, reading her stories even though she was too young to understand, singing her the songs his own mother had sung to him. The boys, now energetic toddlers, were endlessly fascinated by their baby sister. "Careful, Thomas," Cassidy said when the oldest boy reached out to touch Margaret's face. "She is very small and delicate." "Baby," Thomas said, one of his few clear words. "My baby." "Yes, she is your sister," Cassidy confirmed. "You and Marcus are going to help protect her and teach her things as she grows." Life in the mountain cabin fell into a comfortable rhythm. Owen's trapping business was successful enough that they were never wanting for money, though they lived simply by choice. Cassidy took over more of the business side, writing up invoices and keeping careful records now that she could read and write. She also started teaching the boys their letters, determined that they would never know the shame of illiteracy that she had experienced. On quiet evenings after the children were asleep, Owen and Cassidy would sit by the fire as they had since the beginning. Sometimes they would read together, sometimes they would just talk, and sometimes they would sit in companionable silence, content in each other's presence. "Do you ever regret it?" Cassidy asked one night. "Taking me in, teaching me, tying yourself to me when you could have stayed free?" Owen looked at her like she had asked the most ridiculous question in the world. "Cassidy, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and our children, this life we have built together, it is more than I ever dreamed possible. I would not change a single moment. Even the hard parts," Cassidy pressed. "The sleepless nights with the twins, the tight money when the trapping was poor, all of it." "Especially the hard parts," Owen said firmly, "because we faced them together. Because you stood by me through everything, just as I stood by you. That is what marriage is, Cassidy. Not just the easy moments, but the hard ones too." Cassidy moved to sit beside him, tucking herself against his side in the way that had become second nature. "I love you, Owen Lawson, more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. And I love you, Cassidy Lawson, my brave, brilliant, beautiful wife." Owen kissed the top of her head. "My partner in everything." As the years passed, their family continued to grow. Another son, Daniel, was born when the twins were 5 and Margaret was 3. Then 2 years after that, twin daughters, Rose and Lily, joined the family. The cabin that had once seemed spacious now felt full to bursting with children, and Owen spent a summer building an addition to give everyone more room. Cassidy had long since mastered reading and writing, and she had moved on to more complex subjects. Owen brought her books on botany and medicine, and she used them to create a comprehensive herb garden and learn basic healing skills. When miners or trappers passing through the area got injured or sick, they started coming to the Lawson cabin for help, knowing that the trapper's wife had knowledge beyond the average frontier woman. She also started teaching other women to read. It began when a young wife from a ranch down the mountain came to her, ashamed and desperate to learn so she could read her husband's letters when he was away on cattle drives. Cassidy taught her with the same patience Owen had shown her, and word spread. Soon, several women were making the journey to the cabin for lessons, and Cassidy felt her heart swell with the knowledge that she was giving others the gift Owen had given her. "You are changing lives," Owen told her one evening after the last of her students had left. "Just like you changed mine." "I am passing on what you gave me," Cassidy said. "It is the least I can do." The children thrived in their mountain home. Thomas and Marcus grew tall and strong like their father, learning to hunt and trap and survive in the wilderness. Margaret was bright and curious, always asking questions and demanding to learn everything her brothers learned. Daniel was quieter but thoughtful, preferring books to traps. And the twin girls, Rose and Lily, were wild and fearless, climbing trees and catching frogs and generally keeping their parents on constant alert. Owen taught all of them to read and write, just as he had taught Cassidy. The cabin was filled with the sound of children reciting their letters, of debates about stories, of laughter and learning. It was everything Cassidy had never known she wanted, and she treasured every chaotic, beautiful moment. When Thomas and Marcus were 12, they started accompanying Owen on longer hunting trips, learning the trade that would someday be theirs if they chose it. When they came back from their first week-long expedition, both boys were bursting with stories about tracking elk and sleeping under the stars. Cassidy listened with a mixture of pride and worry, knowing her babies were growing up. They did well, Owen assured her that night. "They are smart and capable just like their mother. They are like their father," Cassidy countered, "strong and brave and good." "They are like both of us," Owen said, "the best of both of us." Margaret proved to have a talent for healing, and by the time she was 10, she was assisting Cassidy with her patients. She had gentle hands and a calm demeanor that put people at ease, and Cassidy knew her daughter had found her calling. Daniel wanted to be a teacher, and he spent hours helping his younger sisters with their lessons, showing the same patience that Owen had always demonstrated. Rose and Lily declared they were going to be explorers who traveled the world, and no one doubted they would find a way to make it happen. As Cassidy approached her 40th birthday, she looked at her life with wonder. She and Owen had been married for more than 20 years now, and somehow he still made her heart flutter when he smiled at her. The cabin was filled with children ranging from 10 to 22, and soon there would be grandchildren. Thomas had recently married a kind girl from Durango, and they were already expecting their first child. "Can you believe we are going to be grandparents?" Cassidy asked Owen one evening. They were alone in the cabin for once, all the children either moved out or visiting friends. "I can barely believe we have adult children," Owen said. "It seems like just yesterday you were walking into that restaurant in Durango, half-starved and desperate." "That girl could never have imagined this life," Cassidy said softly. "She was so scared, so lost, and then you offered her hope." "You gave yourself hope," Owen corrected. "You made the choice to come with me to learn to build this life. I just provided the opportunity." "You provided everything," Cassidy said. "You taught me to read, to write, to see myself as worthy of love and respect. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me a life worth living." Owen pulled her close, and they danced slowly in front of the fire without music. "You gave me all those things too," he said. "I was just existing before you, Cassidy. You taught me how to truly live." They stood there swaying together, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful from almost nothing. Outside, the mountains stood silent and strong, the same mountains that had sheltered them for more than 2 decades. The same clearing where Owen had taught Cassidy her first letters, where they had raised their children, where they had created a life filled with love and learning and purpose. Their first grandchild, a boy named Owen Thomas Lawson, was born in the spring of 1899. Cassidy held him and felt the circle of life complete itself. This baby would never know what it was like to be unable to read, would never understand the shame of illiteracy or the fear of homelessness. He would be born into love and learning, into a family that valued education and kindness, into a legacy that Cassidy and Owen had built together from nothing. "He has your eyes," Cassidy told Owen as she watched her husband hold his grandson. "He has your determination," Owen said. "I can already see it." As the new century approached, the Lawson family gathered at the mountain cabin for a celebration. All 6 of their children were there with their own spouses and children, and the cabin and the yard were filled with noise and laughter and love. Cassidy watched it all from the porch, Owen's arm around her waist, and felt a peace that went bone deep. "We did good," Owen said quietly. "We did," Cassidy agreed. "We did very good." That evening, after everyone had settled down for the night with bedrolls spread throughout the cabin and yard, Owen and Cassidy took a walk down to the creek where they had spent so many evenings. The moon was full and bright, turning the water to silver. They sat on the bank, their shoulders touching, and looked up at the stars. "You remember the first night I taught you the alphabet?" Owen asked. "I remember everything," Cassidy said. "I remember how patient you were, how you never made me feel stupid. I remember the way the firelight made shadows on the wall, and how your voice sounded when you said 'that is right, Cassidy.' You are doing so well. I remember feeling hope for the first time in years. I remember thinking that I wanted to spend every evening like that for the rest of my life," Owen said. "Teaching you, talking with you, just being near you. I fell in love with you so fast it scared me." "I fell in love with you too," Cassidy said. "With your kindness and your strength, and the way you saw me as more than just an illiterate girl. You saw potential in me when I could not see it in myself." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the creek babble and the night birds call. Then Owen said, "I need you to know something, Cassidy. These past 20 years with you have been the happiest of my life. Every single day, I wake up grateful that you walked into that restaurant, that you trusted me enough to come to the mountains, that you chose to build a life with me." "Owen," Cassidy said, hearing something in his voice that made her uneasy. "Why does this sound like goodbye?" "It is not," Owen assured her. "I just want to make sure you know how much you mean to me, how much you have always meant to me. You saved me just as much as I saved you, Cassidy. Maybe more." Cassidy took his hand, feeling the familiar calluses, the strong fingers that had guided hers through so many lessons. "We saved each other," she said, "and we will keep saving each other every day for as long as we both live." As they walked back to the cabin hand in hand, Cassidy thought about the girl she had been, desperate and illiterate and afraid. That girl would never have believed she could have this life, this family, this love. But Owen had seen past her circumstances to the woman she could become, and he had given her the tools to transform herself. And in return, she had given him companionship and partnership, had filled his lonely cabin with life and love and laughter. They had built something beautiful together, something that would last long after they were gone. Their children would pass on the value of education and kindness. Their grandchildren would grow up knowing they could be anything they wanted to be. And all of it traced back to a mountain man who had offered a starving girl a meal and an illiterate woman a chance to learn. Years continued to pass in their mountain sanctuary. As Owen grew older, his hair turning silver and his movements slower, Cassidy was always by his side. When his hands began to shake too much to write, she became his hands. When his eyes grew too weak to read in dim light, she read to him by the fire, returning the gift he had given her so many years ago. Their children were all successful and happy, settled in their own lives but never straying far from the mountain cabin that would always be home. Thomas had taken over most of the trapping business, working it alongside his brothers Marcus and Daniel. Margaret had become the most sought-after healer in 3 counties, her knowledge of herbs and medicine legendary. Rose and Lily had indeed become explorers of a sort, both of them teachers who traveled to remote areas to educate children who otherwise would never go to school. "They are all so much like you," Owen said one evening when they were in their late 60s, watching their grandchildren play in the clearing. "Determined and brave and good." "They are like both of us," Cassidy said, echoing words Owen had spoken decades earlier. "The very best of both of us." On their 40th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered once again at the mountain cabin. There were so many people now that they had to hold the celebration outside, with tables set up under the pines and children running everywhere. Someone had arranged for a photographer to come up from Durango, and he took pictures of the whole family, preserving the moment for generations to come. In the photograph, Owen and Cassidy sat in chairs of honor, surrounded by their 6 children, 19 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. Owen's arm was around Cassidy's shoulders, and they were both smiling, their faces weathered by time and sun but their eyes still bright with love for each other. 40 years, Cassidy marveled that night when they were alone in the cabin. 40 years since we stood in that little church in Durango and promised to spend our lives together. "Best decision I ever made," Owen said. His voice was weaker now than it had been, his body worn down by decades of hard living in the mountains, but his love for Cassidy burned as bright as ever. "Loving you, Cassidy Lawson, has been the greatest privilege of my life." "And loving you has been mine," Cassidy said. She took his hand, the same hand that had guided hers through countless letters and words and sentences, the hand that had held hers through childbirth and sickness and joy. "Thank you for seeing me, Owen, for seeing past what I could not do to what I could become." "You were always meant for great things," Owen said. "I just helped you see it." When Owen passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years later, Cassidy felt like part of her soul had been torn away. But she did not crumble. She had been forged strong by the man who had loved her, and she carried on with the same determination she had shown in learning her letters all those years ago. She stayed in the mountain cabin, surrounded by her children and grandchildren who took turns keeping her company. She continued teaching women to raid, passing on Owen's gift to anyone who needed it. And every evening, she sat by the fire and read from the books Owen had loved, feeling his presence in every word. On what would have been their 45th wedding anniversary, Cassidy climbed the hill behind the cabin where Owen was buried. She brought wildflowers and one of their old slates, the chalk marks long since faded. "I am still reading," she told him, placing the slate beside his marker. "Every single day, just like you taught me, and I am still teaching others, spreading the gift you gave me." "Our great-great-grandchildren are learning their letters now, Owen. Can you believe that? 5 generations of readers, all because you took a chance on an illiterate girl in a dusty Colorado town." The wind whispered through the pines, and Cassidy could almost hear Owen's voice in it, telling her she had done well, that he was proud of her. She sat there for a long time, remembering firelit evenings and patient lessons, remembering the feel of his hand over hers as he guided her through the alphabet, remembering the moment she had first read a whole sentence and the joy on his face. "I love you," she said finally. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond. Thank you for everything, Owen Lawson. Thank you for teaching me to read. Thank you for teaching me to love. Thank you for teaching me that I was worthy of a beautiful life." Cassidy lived another 10 years, long enough to see all of her children grandparents themselves, long enough to read at the weddings of her great-grandchildren, long enough to know that the legacy she and Owen had built would endure. She remained sharp and engaged until the very end, reading books and writing letters and teaching anyone who came to her wanting to learn. When she finally passed away peacefully in her sleep, at the age of 77, surrounded by family in the cabin that had been her home for nearly 60 years, her last thoughts were of Owen and that first evening by the fire when he had written the letter on a slate and changed her life forever. They buried her beside Owen on the hill overlooking the clearing, and at her funeral, her oldest granddaughter read from a journal Cassidy had kept. It was the story of an illiterate girl and a lonely mountain man, of lessons by firelight and love that transcended circumstance. It was the story of how education could transform a life and how kindness could heal old wounds. It was the story of Cassidy and Owen Lawson, two people who had saved each other and built something beautiful from almost nothing. The mountain cabin still stands, maintained now by the sixth generation of Lawsons. Inside, on a shelf of honor, sits an old slate with chalk marks barely visible, an ancient collection of books with worn pages, and a photograph of a couple who loved each other deeply. And on warm summer evenings, when the family gathers in the clearing, they tell stories of their ancestors who proved that with patience, kindness, and determination, anyone can learn to read and anyone can find love, no matter where they start from. The legacy of that mountain man who taught his wife her letters by firelight every night lives on in every Lawson who values education, in every person taught to read by Cassidy or her descendants, in every act of kindness offered to someone who needs help. Owen and Cassidy's love story became legend in those mountains, a testament to the transformative power of education and the enduring strength of true love. And somewhere in the whisper of wind through the pines, in the babble of the creek where they courted, in the crackle of fires in the stone fireplace where they sat together for decades, the spirits of Owen and Cassidy remain, forever young, forever in love, forever teaching and learning together by the warm glow of firelight.